Oh, captain, my captain. These are the Club Fantasy DFS Showdown videos, and this video will be breaking down the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Baltimore Ravens in Conference Championship weekend. I am the captain, Joshua Hudson, and this is my compass, Austin Amandolia. And Austin, every DFS video starts with the chalk play. Who's our captain chalk of the Chiefs versus Ravens this week?
Well, if you watch the divisional round, it should be no shock that Lamar Jackson is the chalk play of the week. He went off for 100 rushing yards last week and 2 rushing touchdowns, scoring 22 points on the ground alone, which is 25 points on DraftKings with that 3-point 100-yard rushing game bonus.
Words are hard.
There we go. 100-yard bonus. A whopping 25 points on the ground alone. He's been averaging 69 rushing yards per game over his last 5 starts. And essentially, this offense runs through him. Most of the scoring that happens is probably going to come through Lamar. If they score passing touchdowns, obviously that's coming from him. And he's their best weapon on the ground. And I would bet on him scoring a rushing touchdown over either of the running backs.
Yeah, and let's be honest here. Who else? Like, every defense seems to think, oh, we know how to stop Lamar. And literally none of them have been able to do it. Except maybe Pittsburgh, because they seemingly beat them twice a year. But guess what? Pittsburgh's not in the playoffs right now. So we're okay. I am very intrigued by these two defenses, not as like actual captains, but we'll get to them in a little bit. But if you've caught any of these DFS Showdown videos lately, we will tell you how you can play these showdown slates against us a little bit later in the show. But we also have a lot of fun segments. We just hit on the captain. This next subject is going to be the mutineer. These are the contrarian captain choices that offer a little bit of variety and upside in some of these larger tournaments. You talked about Lamar as the chalk play, which makes a ton of sense. He's the most expensive player on the slate in the showdown. Now we come to a couple of Kansas City Chiefs skill position players that definitely offer a little bit of upside for various different reasons.
Yeah, exactly. And they're also players that are not on the favorite team to win. Right now, Baltimore are 3.5 points favorites. So by picking somebody from Kansas City, you're getting a little different there. First off, we have Isiah Pacheco. This is going for a very specific type of game script. It's one where Kansas City tries to keep the ball out of Baltimore's hands, and Baltimore basically does the same. So very slow-paced game where the defenses are pretty stout. Also, though, Baltimore is actually the best matchup for running backs this weekend, believe it or not. They've allowed 24 points per game to running backs since week 15. And Kansas City has shown that they can commit to the run when they need to. They have run this offense through Isiah Pacheco at various points in the season. And I don't think many people are going to want to play Pacheco at the captain spot just because there's something about him that he doesn't feel like he should be the Derrick Henry type of running back who's going to get 25 touches in a game and score you 2 touchdowns. But he could do it. Not because he's Derrick Henry, but he's got his own style and he can get there.
People just focus too much on that weird running style and how angry he is when he runs. So that's why they're just kind of like, meh. All right. Well, on the flip side of that, let's flip the script. Let's say that both these teams end up airing it out. Let's talk about Rashee Rice.
In that case, Rashee Rice is a really great option. I think he can get there just on the volume. Basically, there's no one on the Baltimore side that I really feel gets enough volume to warrant a captain spot. You could maybe go there with Isaiah Likely, but he didn't get a ton of volume last weekend, and that's in part because Baltimore wants to run the ball and they want to run Lamar as a way to keep defenses off balance. The thing about Rashee Rice, you may be worried about Marlon Humphrey, which I get. Even if he is on the field, I think Rashee Rice is likely to get plenty of volume. Plus, they may want to put Humphrey on Travis Kelce to make sure that they don't get beat by Kansas City's best player outside of Patrick Mahomes. So I feel good about Rice. He could get there on volume. He could get a couple of touchdowns. It's probably not going to be highly rostered. People are probably going to be leaning more on Lamar and maybe now Travis Kelce after he had a better week last week.
I was going to say 5 for 75, 2 touchdowns. I remember commenting on the last Kansas City Chiefs video we did about how inexpensive Kelsey was. Yep, jumped right back up to 9.8. Okay, that's always fun. This next category is called the first mate because every captain needs that reliable crew. So these are going to be the standouts that help maximize your lineups. You just talked about a couple of Kansas City Chiefs. Let's keep on that Baltimore running game and talk about Justice Hill.
Yeah, so Justice Hill had 15 touches last week, which was more than Gus Edwards, much to my chagrin, because I was really looking forward to Gus Edwards last week. Did not pan out. But as much as Baltimore has been a good matchup for running backs, so is Kansas City. They've allowed 19 points per game to running backs since week 15. The other thing about Justice Hill is his price went down from last week. He had more touches. He was the lead running back in this offense. He caught some passes, had some targets, and his price went down. I think he's just too cheap. He's like almost a deck scrubber at this point, almost a punt play. But I love the floor we'll get with him and the amount of usage. Plus, if he gets in the end zone, all the better. Again, this could be a low scoring game. It could be a grinded out matchup, which will favor a guy like Justice Hill.
So how about OBJ, who's been little here, little there, not too many pop weeks? Why do you like him as a first mate this week?
Yeah, I feel this way about like all of the Baltimore receivers outside of Zay Flowers. And the idea here is basically I'm betting on L'Jarius Sneed, focusing his attention on Zay Flowers and shutting down Zay Flowers. I think there's a good chance that Sneed shadow happens. And so that's going to open up guys in the offense like Odell Beckham Jr., like someone else we're going to talk about later. And I think, Odell Beckham, he's gonna have weeks where he pops. And the thing about the Ravens defense or the Ravens offense is the fact that there are so many receiving options means you can kind of just place your bet on a given week and plant your flag in the ground, say, I'm in on Odell Beckham this year. And you might be right one week, you might not be. That's kind of the risk you're taking, but that's also like a way you can lean into the volatility there and gain advantage on other people in the field who are going to want to avoid players like Odell Beckham.
Yeah, Todd Monken's offense has really spread the ball around, and it's given Lamar a lot to work with, which has made it very difficult to kind of predict which Ravens receivers are going to pop every week. So we've done 2 weeks worth of these games, and very few times have we even talked about kickers, which I'm fine with because I'm very anti-kicker. But in showdown slates, they have some value. So let's talk a little bit about both Justin Tucker and Harrison Butker.
Yeah, they do have some value in showdown slates. I tend to be very choosy about when I go after a kicker or a defense. And this is one of the game contexts where I am willing to throw in a kicker, in part because these defenses are tough. And so there's a really good chance that both Kansas City and Baltimore are starting to drive down the field. They get to around the 30-yard line. Maybe they get to the 20, and then they stall out. At that point, a lot of times they're probably going to go ahead and kick the field goal unless they are in like a 4th and 1 situation or the game flow is just in a direction where a team needs to go for it. So that can favor guys like Justin Tucker and Harrison Butker. They're also 2 incredibly reliable kickers. So I don't imagine that their coaches are going to want to take the ball out of their hands when they need to score points.
So I think these 2 would pair really well if you try to go the route of Pacheco as your contrarian captain, because you're ultimately kind of expecting a slower pace game, maybe some red zone defense stops. Again, these are 2 really good defenses. So getting kind of these cheaper options in there instead of your wide receivers, I think is a pretty solid play. Our next category here is going to be the deck scrubbers. These are the cheaper punt play options that can make or break a lineup based on one play, limited opportunity. And Austin, before we get to your points, I want to bring up last week when you ridiculed me for suggesting MVS, and he had a couple of catches last week for a dirt cheap price, and now he's like $3,000 more expensive. Just wanted to throw that out there.
He's a lot more expensive, but let's be honest. When Patrick Mahomes threw that ball towards him, did you think he was going to catch it?
No, I really did not. But the point is, he did catch it.
No, but
let's talk about some wide receivers on the other side.
I was going to say the players we have a couple of Ravens wide receivers. Again, we're playing into that idea that it's hard to predict which of these receivers are going to be the ones to get into the end zone, but we want to lean into that. We want to lean into that uncertainty because it's other people are going to avoid it, and it provides opportunity for upside for us. So first off, there's Nelson Agholor. There's always Nelson Agholor. He just seems to always be there for Lamar Jackson. I don't understand it. He got into the end zone last week. I talked about this last week. He kind of plays this weird, like more traditional tight end role, even though he's a receiver in this offense. So I'm a fan of that. Similarly, Rashod Bateman has been quietly consistent here and there. And if he gets in the end zone, he can easily get there. And with both of these guys, it's a similar argument as with Odell Beckham Jr. If L'Jarius Sneed is focusing all of his attention on Zay Flowers, maybe he starts focusing attention on Isaiah Likely if Likely gets some early targets. These three, any one of them could get there. A couple of them could get there with a touchdown, depending on how this game script goes. If this game hits the over and it's more of a shootout than we might think. So I feel comfortable taking dart throws on really any of these Ravens wide receivers. I think depending on your build is going to depend on which receivers you pick. So like if I have Lamar as my captain, I'm probably going to need to go down to Nelson Agholor or Rashod Bateman just because Odell Beckham is a little bit more expensive. Whereas if I have a guy like Isiah Pacheco or Rashee Rice as my captain, then I might be able to pay up for a guy like Odell Beckham. And I think that he's kind of been flowing under the radar and is a good person to pick this week. So really just take your pick of the litter with the Ravens wide receivers.
And speaking of pricing, you got Bateman at 3,200. You have Nelson Agholor at 5,000 and OBJ at 5,400 with Zay Flowers coming in at 8,400. So yeah, a lot of discrepancy there when it comes to your price points. So as I teased up in the beginning of the show, before we get to the last segment, Austin, remind everybody how they can play these showdown slates and conference championship weekend games against us in DFS.
Yeah, there are links in the show description to join our leagues on both DraftKings and FanDuel. We have contests already in there for the championship games, and we will have a showdown slate for each of the games on our DraftKings league. So you'll be able to play both games with us on Sunday.
Love it. All right. Final segment, the Kraken. Because every hero needs a villain. So these are going to be your lineup traps that sink the ship. One of them, let's be honest, he managed to just fumble away his loan opportunities last week. And yes, I'm talking about Mecole Hardman. Austin, I will save you the trouble. Just don't. Just don't. I don't care how cheap he is. Just don't. But Austin, I do want to talk about Gus Edwards. Because you talked about Justice Hill already.
Yeah, Gus Edwards, my, how the mighty have fallen. Last week, he was a contrarian captain option for me, and now I'm like, nope, he's a trap. And yeah, he's too expensive for the usage. His price is wild. He's the most expensive running back, Ravens running back on the slate. The only running back more expensive than him is Isiah Pacheco, but he only had 10 carries last week, and he caught one pass for -1 yards. That's not very inspiring. And Justice Hill seems to have taken over the backfield. I don't feel good about Gus Edwards anymore. It's kind of a bummer. I also think perhaps his running style is not lending itself to going up against these tougher playoff matchups. A lot of these playoff teams good against the run. That's why they made the playoffs. And Kansas City, they have a guy named Chris Jones who tends to be in the middle. And I don't think Gus Edwards is going to fare too well running into Chris Jones for 4 quarters. Justice Hill, on the other hand, can get outside more and get some passes, and so would like him there. So avoid Gus Edwards. He's a trap.
So I want to pose this question before we close out this video, because we saw towards the tail end of last week, obviously we know that Baltimore won by quite a bit, and they decided to get Dalvin Cook a little bit more involved. They got him about, I believe it was like 5 carries. His first run was 21 yards, right? Came right out of the gate. We know his pass catching prowess, and you talked about Gus Edwards essentially running right into the middle of Chris Jones. If they want to work more around the edges, do you think this could be a game where Dalvin Cook at 1,200 on DraftKings might actually be worth a dart throw if they decide to go more of these, like, I don't want to call them field stretchers, but kind of like running more along the outside versus the interior of the offense?
Yeah, I think it really depends on your contest selection. If you're playing single entry showdown slates, hell no, I would not play Dalvin Cook. If you're playing 20 entries and you're getting some exposure, I think having him in a lineup or two is fine. I wouldn't go overweight on him just because there's a good chance he only touched the ball last week because they were up by 3 touchdowns, right? So it really, we don't know yet. We don't have enough proof of concept with Dalvin Cook. But if you're playing in these larger field tournaments with multi entries, then taking a dart throw here and there is always worth it.
Love it. Yeah, and there's not really a ton of cheaper options, really, because let's face it, we're avoiding Mecole Hardman like the plague. This has been our DFS Showdown video here on Club Fantasy, breaking down the Chiefs versus the Ravens. You can follow Club Fantasy across the socials at Club Fantasy FFL, the URL clubfantasyffl.com. I am Joshua Hudson at the One Hudsonian. That is Austin Amandolia at Austin_FFL. Stay tuned for the next video that breaks down the Detroit Lions versus the San Francisco 49ers.